Today's episode is sponsored by the Positively Living Co-working Club. If you're inspired by the topics here but struggle to take action, join us. The Co-working Club provides resources and accountability focused on doing, not networking. Obligers and introverts, this is for you. Get details and join for $20 a month at positivelyproductive.com/resources.
Understanding and awareness are the first steps in any kind of consciousness endeavor when we're trying to expand our consciousness. And it's making a choice to not try to shove away the feelings or avoid or distract yourself or to tell yourself, oh, I shouldn't feel this way. I chose this. When we're blindsided by it sometimes, that's when we have to choose into, well, I am going to consciously mourn this loss. I'm going to choose to grieve consciously. And the short answer to how do I grieve consciously is to meet all of your feelings with compassion, with self-love, and to be unafraid of your own emotional life.
You're listening to the Positively Living podcast. I'm your host, Lisa Zaratny, founder of Positively Productive Systems and a productivity coach certified in positive psychology and stress management. Join me as we explore ways to live a more proactive, positive life with episodes on productivity, self-awareness, mindset, entrepreneur life, habits and systems, simplicity, fun, and more. I understand overwhelm personally as a multi-passionate entrepreneur, wife and mom to kids and cats, and as a caregiver. I'm here to help you choose what's right for you so you can do less, live more, and breathe easier. Sound good? Let's get to it. Welcome to the Positively Living podcast. I'm your host, Lisa, and we're continuing our conversation about grief in a new way. We've talked a good bit about what grief truly is and how to make peace with it within our lives, including ways to process it and how to help others deal with it. Today, we're focusing on how to take action while grieving so you can rebuild your life. It's a conversation of encouragement and specific steps to help you identify where you are in your grief path and how you can move forward. Today's guest, Carrie Hopkins-Doubts, is a spiritual resilience coach working with men and women experiencing major life transitions, whether it be relationships, career, health, or spirituality. As the founder of Life's Next Chapter Coaching, Carrie's passion is helping clients consciously and powerfully rebuild their lives after loss. In today's episode, Carrie reviews the nature and impact of grief on us, and then helps us understand what conscious grieving is and why it benefits us. She also shares how we know we're ready to move forward and what our next steps need to be. If you'd like to catch up on the collection of grief conversations we've had here on the podcast, go to the podcast page of the website, positivelyproductive.com/podcast, and type grief in the search bar. You will find all these episodes. Where are you currently when it comes to grief? Is it something fresh or firmly part of your life at this point? Would you be willing to share with me? If you are, I would love to know and I'd love to support you. Wherever you are in the process, I'm holding space for you and wish you continued healing. May you still find joy in the midst of it all. And if you're struggling with that, please reach out. I have resources to help. Now let's join Carrie as we talk about rebuilding your life while grieving. Carrie, welcome to the Positively Living podcast. I'm really looking forward to this conversation today.
Thank you, Lisa. So am I. It's great to be on your show.
Before we begin with today's topic of rebuilding your life while grieving, I'd love it if you'd tell us a little bit about who you are, what brought you here today, and probably most importantly, what makes you light up?
Wow, there's a lot to that question. So, a little bit about me. I am a coach. I work with people going through major loss that could be categorized as a divorce, bereavement, loss of a job, major life transitions where you've just suddenly been booted out of normal and you're trying to figure out what's next. I had studied originally to become a marriage and family therapist and realized that that really wasn't the career path for me and got into coaching. And I've been coaching full time for over 11 years now. From the get go, I was always interested in supporting people through times when they're not at their best. They're, really feeling in the grip of some powerful emotions. So, yeah, I just started working in that area. And then, I'd been through loss myself. My divorce from my first husband was very challenging and traumatic. That was over 20 years ago, and, at this point, it's really just part of my past, and as a matter of fact, I am still connected with my ex-husband. He lives with our daughter, and they live right around the corner from me, so I see them a lot. So that has come full circle. I've gone through the death of my parents, but the main thing that really rocked my world was the death of my husband 3 years ago. And I had been coaching people going through the loss of a spouse or a partner. And, I had the training, I had the maps, I knew how to support people through that. And it was going through my own loss personally, where I got to walk the territory rather than just know what it looks like. And so, 3 years after that, I am still just very passionate about supporting people who are going through this kind of loss. And so, yeah, I do a lot of work individually and in groups and online courses and all of that stuff.
First of all, my heart to yours, my deepest sympathy for that. And I think it's such a beautiful thing when you can take a loss like that and turn it into something so beautiful as helping others. And now a newfound empathy with that, right?
Yeah, a newfound understanding of, I do get it. I've been where you are. That's just so helpful when you're talking to people and especially when they don't feel like they're being understood by anyone in their lives.
Those are definitely elements that helped us connect, where I could see how much you wanted to take what you've been through and help others. And that was something you were doing anyhow. But then I think the more we have these life experiences that can help us lean into this, the more we can help. And with that, it's not just about the helping, but it's about the understanding and the acceptance and holding space for others to do the same. That this is something, these losses and what we're going through, something we live with. And that's a main message that I hope to help others connect with when they listen, is that grief and trauma, these are parts of our lives. There's a thread woven through the fabric of our lives. So as opposed to, oh, that's a separate thing, I have to deal with it and then I go back, it's more of a, how do I coexist with it?
That's a really good way to put it. According to the research, it takes like on average 5 to 8 years for a person to recover, from a significant loss. And I use recover in air quotes, because we don't, like you said, we don't really recover from grief. We adapt to it. We adjust our lives to accommodate it. It becomes part of our lives. It doesn't always grab our attention all the time, but we understand that even 5, 10 years down the line, you can suddenly come across a grief trigger and feel those raw emotions again.
Absolutely. And then when others grieve around you and you have empathy for them, that can trigger yours. And yeah, it's a thing that's constantly with you. And I think you make such a good point that it's our relationship with it that changes, not the grief itself. And so when we keep using the word grief, we have discussed it on the podcast, but very quickly, and you kind of hinted to this as, when you're helping others with a major loss. So grieving, let's touch upon really grief and the loss with it and what that is and what it can involve. And you mentioned a couple of instances of that already, like losing a loved one, divorce. So can you tell us a bit more about what we may grieve?
Well, anytime we lose something that's important to us, we are no longer in contact with it, whether it's an animal that we've had with us, a pet, a spouse, a sibling, a job. If we have loved this thing and it's important to us, it's going to impact our feelings about it now that it's no longer in our lives. And so the stronger the attachment to it, the stronger the love that we feel for this object that is no longer with us, the more impact grief will have on us. And grief is, simply the normal, response to loss. It's all of those feelings of sadness and anger and regret and guilt, and it runs the whole gamut. It affects us on all levels. It affects us physically, of course. Sometimes when we're going through a major grief and a very fresh grief, it can take a toll on us physically, lack of sleep, not taking care of ourselves well, not eating well, having, illnesses also because our immune systems are suppressed. Of course, it affects us mentally, where we have to come into contact with the world in a whole new way. It often will affect our self-identity. Whereas, if you've been a wife or a husband for 50 years or something like that, you've known the world from that self-identity. And so you really have to rethink, well, who am I and what do I really want? So it affects us, our thoughts. It affects us emotionally, of course. It affects us spiritually. Sometimes when we have the rug pulled out from under us, suddenly we go, well, where was God in all of this? And people sometimes either have a stronger faith because they know that this is what's going to help them through it, or they sometimes have a crisis of faith. So it affects us in profoundly in all kinds of levels.
Absolutely. And one of the things I think about in terms of grief, and you said so beautifully, an identity shift. So you can see how that would apply to divorce or any kind of relationship breakup or separation or division. And then also, too, we can have that with ourselves when we
Yes,
make a choice to make a change in our lives, even when it is intentional and good and positive. We can still grieve what used to be, right?
that's such a good point. In my first marriage, I was the one who initiated the divorce, and I knew that it was the right thing for all of us, for our whole family. And we had a very amicable divorce. So it wasn't like that it was contentious or anything like that, but it was still intensely painful. And I remember, even though, like I said, I knew it was the right thing, and my husband at the time and we had made some strong agreements about how we were going to go through it. I remember getting my judgment in the mail, and the finality of it was, it just like a slap in the face. And so, to your point, even if we initiate a change, get a new job, there's going to be the loss of those coworkers or the loss of the town. Sometimes these losses hit us unawares. Like we think, oh, it's all good. I'm making this exciting change in my life, this new job, new city. And then all of a sudden, they get to the new place and the excitement wears off a little bit. And then, huh, I didn't realize how much I miss just going to the local hangout place and seeing my friends.
Yeah, there are emotions and responses that can really surprise you. And I think that we fight them sometimes, especially in those kinds of circumstances, because it's like, but I chose this, but it's a good thing. But like, why are you complaining? Come on, like,
Right. Why am I feeling this way?
right. Like, what is going on? So,
Yeah.
but to the point, no matter what the trigger of the grief is, it can have such a profound impact across our lives, mentally, physically, spiritually. And the way that you're describing this, I am guessing may have to do with my next question. You talk about conscious grief. Can you lead us into that? And is it about understanding these aspects? Is it more than that?
Well, understanding and awareness are the first steps in any kind of consciousness endeavor when we're trying to expand our consciousness. And so, yes, understanding that, yes, it makes sense that I have feelings about this thing that I've lost. And it's making a choice, I would say, to not try to shove away the feelings or avoid or distract yourself from it, or to tell yourself, oh, I shouldn't feel this way. I chose this. I remember, when I married my second husband, he and I moved to North Carolina. My daughter started college, and I was starting this bright, shiny new life in a new city, and I was unprepared for the level of grief I had about empty nesting.
Hmm.
My daughter was no longer in the next room where I could go tiptoe in and listen to her breathe in the middle of the night and know she's safe. When we're blindsided by it sometimes, that's when we have to choose into, well, I am going to consciously mourn this loss. I'm going to choose to grieve consciously. And the short answer to how do I grieve consciously is to meet all of your feelings with compassion, with self-love, and to be unafraid of your own emotional life.
We have definitely talked about that on the podcast, so thank you for reiterating. I promise I did not pay Carrie for her appearance today. It's like you're speaking my language of compassionate productivity and about the things that we need in order to move forward. So when you were describing what's happening here and then the choice of feeling all the feels, right, and allowing it in, the word acceptance just kept coming up for me. And I had Valerie Friedlander on the podcast recently talking about releasing shame and guilt, which can happen in this instance as well as so many others. And this idea that acceptance is not approval, it's an allowance and an understanding that this is where you are.
You don't have to like it,
No.
but you say, well, this is where I am.
And that, I think, is the place where you can build from, right?
Yeah, it is the first place. If we accept it, then we can go into the next, I hate to say phase, but we can appreciate ourselves and appreciate how we are in the situation. We can also acknowledge that it's really hard, appreciating ourselves for our willingness to try our best to grieve consciously. And, you can think of it as a way of honoring not only yourself, but that which is no longer with you.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
So not only you're cheering yourself on in a way, in encouraging yourself, but you are honoring that where you've lost.
I've heard so many people that I've worked with saying, he or she wouldn't want me carrying on this way. I can't stop myself. Just acknowledging that. I worked with a woman recently who her son had committed suicide
Mm.
9 years ago. And he was in the military at the time. And it was, of course, the loss of a child, and it shreds your heart. And she had left his room as if he had just walked out of it. And there it was 9 years later. And she reached out to me because she's like, I am stuck. I am stuck in trying to keep his room as some way of honoring him. And we really helped her sort of loosen that bind she had put herself in. And she did, over the period of our time together, she did recreate that room into something that was more purposeful. And it really just did give her that energy back that was locked up inside of her holding herself to grieving in this way.
I think that's such a good point. And what I'm taking away from this idea is there's a little of both here. And that one is that, you do have to honor yourself and your grief and what you're feeling. So I know that I often say there's no timeline, there's no rules, there's nothing specific. We can't say, oh, it's a year, get over it. But also, you have to feel through it. And I think when you do that in a conscious way, when you are aware and you're kind of checking in with yourself and touching base and thinking, how am I living? And is this what I want to continue to do? You can gauge whether you allow wherever you are in your grief path to continue, or if you want to, like she did, reach out to you and say, no, this is now a point where I feel stuck and I want to explore it further. So starting with conscious grief, let's go from there into the crux of the conversation today that I was so interested in is this idea of it's not only that we understand grief as part of our lives and that we want to allow and embrace it as opposed to trying to push it away. But how do we then rebuild as we experience the grief?
I think everybody arrives to that question inside of themselves at some point in the journey. And so what does it mean to rebuild your life? It is truly a rebuild. Sometimes, like with a house, right? It's just like, well, I'm going to keep this one wall, but everything else is going to go. Or you're going to tear down the whole thing and, move to a whole new city. It's just, you get to decide what that looks like. And there are steps that I've created in a program that help people walk from, I see where I am now. I see somewhere, somewhat dimly, where I would like to be, at a future time, healthy, happy, thriving, all of that. But I don't know how to get there. My work is taking people by the hand and helping them accelerate through the barriers and the gaps from where they are to where they want to be. And so I've created a program that is a blend of not just learning and understanding, but action, taking action, tiny baby steps.
And the way that you describe this is very much a parallel to what I talk about in the context of productivity and creating habits, right? It's that taking action that's going to move the needle forward, whether it is in the context of a specific goal that you have that you're trying to achieve in general, or in this case, I mean, it is also a goal of rebuilding your life, of moving forward from where you are, being able to take those steps. Because to your point from before, the way that grief can impact us, it can absolutely take our energy away. I mean, not only are we potentially less inclined to self-care, but we can definitely just feel depression. It's like a depressive period of time at the very least, where it feels like even the most basic things are so difficult.
Mm-hmm.
Would you say that it's the goal of kind of what you could dimly see ahead, or is it sometimes just the small goal that you're working with to begin with? Like, I would like to get up and get going again. What do you see?
Absolutely. I mean, you're raising such a good point because when you ask somebody when they're sort of in that critical state of their grieving, well, what's the life that you'd want to create on the other side of this? They would just stare at you blankly and go, I have no idea. I really don't know. I just want to get up in the morning and feel like I can face the day. And so it really depends on where the person is in their process. I tend to work with people who are maybe a little farther into in terms of the passing of time, because they're more ready. People are more ready to start envisioning a future for themselves. At first, you just were like, well, I just need to keep breathing one step at a time, one day at a time. It's meeting people where they are, for sure. And then if they're ready, we start with the steps. And the first step I take with people is to create that safe space for them to feel all the feels, like you said, to feel, express, and release, the feelings of grief. People need to talk. They need to talk about what they're going through.
Yeah, and feel safe in doing so. You know, I tend not to like to use the word normal, but sometimes that's what we feel like. Is this a normal thing? Am I the only one? We want to understand that we are not. So with that, maybe the question here, or it's sort of a combination of what I would ask is, I'm listening to this, I'm listening to you and saying, yeah, okay, I am going to allow myself this grief, but also I want to rebuild. What's our takeaway for today? Like, what's the very next step? Or perhaps maybe this is a dual question, forgive me, but I'm thinking in both directions. How do we tell, or how have you seen someone is ready for this next step?
Like the client I was telling you about who had been 9 years stuck. She was having another sort of crisis in her life that was pushing on her to move forward.
Mm-hmm.
There is that what's going on currently in your life. Is there a motivation to start to pick up and move on. Because I don't know if you know this, but a lot of people do realize that pain is the greatest motivator to get moving. It's not pleasure. We think, oh, I would love to have this gorgeous, svelte body after going to the gym every day for 2 years. But it's the pain of, oh, I don't want to be a diabetic. I better get moving. That's what, motivates people to make big changes in their
I
lives.
feel
So,
seen and called out at the same time with that, Carrie.
yeah, me too. Speaking from experience, right?
Right? Absolutely. I like that. That's really good. Yeah. What's going on to motivate you? And immediately as you were describing that, I was thinking about some of the extreme losses that I've had, the traumas that I have been through, the grief that I've had, and how my children have been a motivator for me to move forward. So, yeah, I think it could be simply the intention of, I think I've had enough of where I am right now, or even saying the words, I feel stuck, or having something motivate you. Those are excellent points.
Yeah. It's like admitting to yourself and then to another, hey, I'm stuck. Can you throw me a rope?
And then when we say that, what would you say would be the very next step to take after that awareness?
One of the next things that people do when they're grieving is they neglect their self-care. The second step that I take people through is creating capacity for the changes that they want to make moving forward and I call it radical self-care because it can feel like a supremely selfish thing to do to focus on your own self and your own self-care, especially like you said, if you have children and other people who need you and their needs come first. So I really put the spotlight on you. And in order for you to have the capacity to start moving forward, you got to focus on putting your oxygen mask on first and making sure that you're taking care of yourself because we can't give from an empty cup. So we take a look at your self-care. Are you sleeping? Are you eating nutritious meals? Are you exercising? Are you doing the things that give you a sense of satisfaction? There's all kinds of self-care.
You're speaking my language. Totally. I mean, this is absolutely the conversation we're having here all the time. And one of the really important aspects within this, and again, I'm bringing it, from a productivity kind of perspective, is that when you do these things, this care, it manages your energy, it manages your nervous system. So finally, you can stand down, you can get beyond that fight or flight kind of mode, and you can be in a calm, focused place that will actually help you make those decisions that you couldn't before, like, what do I want? What do I want next, right?
Yeah, it's getting the person moving. Small incremental changes. And not only that, it has a huge shift in the psyche for the person. It's like, I'm important. My life is important. My life is not over. I need to attend to myself with kindness, with care, with generosity. And so when we start to do that, our own self-image, our own self-esteem starts to build again. Because I can't tell you how many people just have come into conversation with me and saying, I don't know why I'm here. I don't know why I'm supposed to be here. I don't think my life matters anymore. It's like doing things that give you the experience of I can count on myself to take care of myself. That just starts to build self-esteem and build energy towards creating and designing and creating that future.
There's so much goodness in here. And of course, one of the things that is coming to my mind too is that when you've gone through an extreme loss, and especially when it is the loss of a loved one, and even more so, should there be some kind of catastrophic event connected to it, you can have survivor's guilt. You can have so many things where you're like, what is the point? And you're right that the action that we take by even asking ourselves, what do you need? Have you ever looked in the mirror and said, what do you need? Have you ever thought to yourself, what do I need? And then honored that? That is sending a message. that you are worthy right here and right now, and you are deserving. That's beautiful. As we head toward wrapping up, how does this go so quickly? But as we head there, are there any other thoughts, any other bits of advice that you would want us to hold on to as we move forward, especially if we feel like we're in this position, or maybe on behalf of someone else that we know that's going through this?
I mean, some of the end steps towards where we know that we're starting to come out the other side of this big transition period that you're in. You're starting your new beginning. You can look back to where you've come from and name and start to appreciate and embrace the strengths that you've gained. I don't really like it when people front load a conversation about grief of, oh, you're going to find the gifts of your grief. Because when people are fresh in it, they go, no, thank you very much. They just shut down. It's like there's no gift in this. you know. But at the end, when you are moving through and you're able to reflect and look back and wow, I never knew that I could be that strong. I never knew that I could learn how to do X, Y, or Z. That's a huge part of when we know that we're starting to come out the other side and create this new normal. And you mentioned this at the beginning of our conversation. One of the other indicators is that in looking at that, we look at our lives and we go, how can I serve others who are going on a similar path to me? What can I do to help another person's suffering? We're anchoring what we've learned by giving back in service. And I just can't tell you how many times I've talked with people where it invokes in them a new business, a new calling. Those are steps to look forward to. I would just say my encouragement to everybody is to not try to do this alone because we'll disconnect, we'll distract ourselves, and we'll make the process last a lot longer. And it doesn't necessarily mean you have to go into heavy therapy or anything like that. Having a trusted friend or family member, somebody that, gets you and who is able to companion with you instead of trying to fix you or trying to hurry you along, or it's really important to have the support of another person or a group or a coach. So it's really important. I know even when I was walking through the grief of losing my Tom, I was working with a coach and gosh, I'm a grief coach. So you'd think, okay, I'm in it. I'm feeling my feelings. And it's like I would spend the 2 weeks avoiding everything and doing all the things that everybody does. I would show up to my session, and there I am, being held in the most generous, safe space, doing the work. That's an encouragement that I have for people. Find a safe place to do this kind of healing work.
Oh, I firmly agree with that. Coaches need coaches, for starters.
For sure.
And yes, there are support groups and there are oftentimes trusted friends. When Janice Picachol joined us and we talked about what can you do when someone is in this position, and we talked about the wondrous gift of holding space for someone. I can't think of a better thing that you can do. And what you're talking about in terms of serving, the way she described it was that, making your grief mean something in a way. It does bring meaning to your life. And I thought that was so lovely. And Lindsay Taylor was on the podcast talking about coping with grief by giving back. But again, it's all a matter too of what you're ready for. But these are such excellent points, things to think of for when you're ready. And also what you touched upon there also brings up the idea of gratitude. And it's one of my favorite topics. And it's the idea of gratitude within adversity, that gratitude doesn't negate what you've gone through. And it doesn't mean that you're beyond it, but that you can see little bright lights within something that is so difficult. And you can, even for a brief moment, it allows you to breathe and see a good moment, even if, you go back to the pain after that. And those little things that we do when we keep in practice, like a habit, it will grow. Beautiful, Carrie. I love that. All right. And with that, we're going to have a little rapid wrap up. It's a bit of joy and fun and some good advice always tends to be wrapped up in there. But before we do, where can we find you online to connect with you?
So my business is Life's Next Chapter Coaching. So I have a website of the same name. There's lots of articles and information and videos and just information if you're looking for information. Also, reach me on my email, which is Carrie at Life's Next Chapter Coaching. So CARRIE, as it says. That's the best way to reach me.
Okay, and we'll make sure to have that in the show notes as well. And let's get into this rapid wrap up. You ready?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so basically, things that inspire positively living for you. We're going to go for a song, a saying, and a resource. So let's start with a song that comes up for you.
I love this one song. It's called Bring 'Em All In, and it's by the Waterboys. Look it up on YouTube. It's a great song. The theme is really about just embracing all of the things in life, all of the others, all of the fragmented parts of ourselves, and just bring them all into your heart. Every time I'm down, I listen to that, and it gets me going again.
This is awesome. I pride myself in knowing a lot of different kinds of music, and this is a new one on me, so I'm looking forward to checking it out. Okay, how about a saying? It could be a mantra, it could be a quote, something you love to share, or something you hold to your heart to help you get through.
I often find myself just encouraging myself, and it's this saying, it's all good. It's all good, even when things don't feel good.
It still is. And you know what? I think that encourages you to look for it.
Mhm.
Okay, now how about a resource? It could be a book, an app, and anything really.
I'm reading now a book that I would recommend. It's called Why the World Doesn't End: Tales of Renewal in Times of Loss. And this is by Michael Meade. It was written about over 10 years ago, and he writes with a mix of psychology and mythology. He's a storyteller. It's a really good read. And it's really about how people rise from the ashes that they were placed into in their lives. So it's a good read.
Oh, that sounds interesting. Whenever there's like storytelling involved, I think it's a little easier for us to digest, and that can be a really good thing if we are feeling overwhelmed. So I will be sure to have that in the Positively Living podcast resources. I have a list of all the different fabulous books that have been recommended here. You can find that on positivelyproductive.com/resources. And now, last but definitely not least, let's share some gratitude with each other. So what or who contributes to positively living for you?
I am grateful for my beautiful home that I just moved into. I'm grateful for my daughter and the relationship that I get to have with her. I'm grateful to my clients. I'm grateful for my dog. I have the sweetest little dog companion here. So yeah, I'm grateful for my husband and his love of me and the way that he supported me while he was living and still, so those are the things that I'm grateful for right now.
Mm, that is beautiful. And I'm so grateful for our chance to collaborate, for you reaching out to say, I'd love to be a part of the conversation that is the Positively Living podcast, for your willingness to share so deeply and to share all your wisdom. So thank you, Carrie, for shining your light so brightly in this world and for sharing it with us today.
Thank you, Lisa. It's an honor to be on your show.
Thank you for joining me today. Your time is precious and limited, and I'm honored you chose to spend it with me. If you have feedback, questions, or want to schedule a chat, head to positivelyproductive.com/connect. And if you are looking for any of the resources referenced on the podcast, from books to products to training and more, go to positivelyproductive.com/resources.